Welcome to The Secret Truth. I'm George Butler. I've got really one of the finest persons that's ever done research in this field called conspiracy scholarship, okay? And Wayne Madsen is sitting here, and we're in Dallas, Texas at the JFK conference. This is the last day. It's Sunday. And Wayne, welcome to our program.
Hi, good to be with you today.
Well, I'll tell you, Wayne, you've been through a lot over the years, have you not?
Well, I've I've covered enough stories where I could probably fill several volumes. I have written 15 books now, but there's always something new, whether it's a suspicious death or another political assassination or a coup d'état, or an unbelievable election, surprise election as the one we've just seen with Donald Trump surpassing all expectations and defeating the person, Hillary Clinton, that was assured of election.
Right. This election was really a surprise for many people, was it not?
Well, yeah. I in my own case, I was on deadline to write an article about the incoming Hillary Clinton administration and her foreign policy, and I wrote this article basically the day before the election on what kind of potential wars and conflicts the United States would be launched into under Hillary Clinton. The next day, I had to trash that article and write a different one about how Donald Trump's foreign policy was going to be much different than Hillary Clinton's.
Right. This debate that's ongoing now about the Electoral College. It seems like it's been divided between the Democrats and the Republicans. Democrats want to vote, just a popular vote outcome, and actually the Electoral College worked properly this time, did it not? Or what are your comments?
Yeah, no, the Electoral College was implemented for a number of reasons. One of which is to preserve the Federation or the Union of the United States. If this were a popular vote election, states would become meaningless, and then the United States would become a unitary republic rather than a federal republic. And no candidate would campaign in Iowa any longer or New Hampshire because there's not that many votes or small populations as compared to California, New York, Texas, Florida. So we'd see the focus of the election change, and people in the hinterlands would feel like they're being ignored. And of course, that's what the founders thought too, that if the states were not given an equal say in the election.
Welcome back to The Secret Truth. I'm with Wayne Madsen here at the JFK conference in Dallas, Texas. And welcome back, Wayne. We lost our power there for a second, but we're back online now. So continue your thoughts there.
Well, the issue of the same people who were involved in the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, here 53 years later, we have good evidence that the father of one of the GOP candidates, Ted Cruz, was involved with the anti-Castro, CIA-run Fair Play, pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba committee, when in fact everyone associated with it was anti-Castro. This was a false flag organization, operational unit, and with Raphael Cruz's name coming up associated with New Orleans and Oswald in 1963, for that to come up in the campaign of 2016 indicates that the same individuals, the same forces that murdered President Kennedy are still active in politics today. And the mere fact that Ted Cruz could have potentially been elected in the place of Donald Trump shows that even 53 years later, these forces are still trying to maintain control over the White House.
Well, you make an interesting point there about the continuance of this power group, but is that not one of our objectives here and goals, is to alert and to try to educate the younger people and just the public at large as to the connection between maybe 1963 and 2016? And you make some very fine points there.
Well, absolutely. it shows that even though many of the perpetrators of the crime of '63 are dead today, their sons and daughters in some cases are still active in politics. They're still part of the what I would call the deep state or the secret state or the shadow government. And it's still with us today. So young people, for example, and I'd like to see more young people at conferences like this who say, well, 53 years ago, that was long before I was born. Why should I care? Well, the reason they should care is because what occurred in '63 and what occurred in '68 with Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and occurred in 1972 with George Wallace and what occurred with President Ford in 1975, who there were 2 attempts against his life, which would have put Nelson Rockefeller, the vice president, in office. What happened to Ronald Reagan in 1981, what happened to John Lennon earlier is just indicative of the fact that these forces are continuing through violent political acts and coups to dominate the American political system.
Right. This conference is well attended this year. I've been up here the last 3. This is the 3rd one I've attended, and this one is full in there, and people are researching this. A friend of mine, Eric Samuelson, redefined the conspiracy individuals to conspiracy scholars, and I think that's getting it up to a decent level. What do you think about this fake news concept? Is that not an assault on the alternative news channels?
Well, yeah, I think people need to be self-policing to suggest that Facebook and Google, through algorithms, should be involved in censorship. I think is going down an Orwellian path that could lead to a very dystopian type future for this country and other countries. It's not up to these providers of information conduits to determine what's fake and what's not, because we already see this slippery slope. Obviously, there's some stories that are fake, but people need to be more alert, more well-read, more knowledgeable to determine what are fake news stories and what are not fake news stories. I'm looking at some of the things already being put out by Facebook and other dubious companies on what constitute fake news stories. Well, there are obvious fake news stories, but there are others that are just controversial news stories. It does not mean they're fake news stories. And we've seen some of these controversial stories being put on the list with obvious fake news stories. So I would suggest what we're seeing now is maybe Mockingbird 3.0. We had Mockingbird, the first one, directed against the newspapers, wire services, magazines, and television networks. Then we had Mockingbird 2.0 on the advent of the internet hitting websites. And now I think we're seeing Mockingbird 3.0 hitting social networks like Facebook, Twitter, and others. I think it's a continuation of this CIA program to disinform and misinform the American public by claiming there's a lot of fake news stories out there.
Right. I've interviewed you on the radio a couple of times, or 2 or 3 times over the years. This is our first sit-down video, and I certainly appreciate you being with us. And what are your final comments on the Trump administration? Is he being surrounded by Goldman Sachs people and internationalists and globalists? Is that what the New World Order is trying to do, is get certain people on board that will help control him?
Yeah, I'm very concerned that Trump is now considering neoconservatives, neocons, discredited people who got us involved in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, who may have been involved in the 9/11, what I consider to have been a American version of the Reichstag fire in Germany that predicated the scrapping of the German Constitution. But to suggest people like John Bolton for a high-level foreign policy position is self-defeating if Trump means what he said during the campaign, that he doesn't want to have any conflicts with Russia or China. He wants He wants to disengage from a lot of these entangling alliances, which President Washington warned us against. Washington would have been totally against NATO and NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade Partnership and these other contrivances. And so I would hope that President Trump does not appoint neocons to his administration, because as we know with neocons, Reagan allowed them in too, and the first thing they did was almost get him impeached with the Iran-Contra scandal. Iran-Contra scandal was a neocon operation from the very get-go, and we saw them, of course, become the George W. Bush administration. Even H.W. Bush kept the neocons at arm's length. I would like to. I realize President Trump has a big issue with trying to fill 4,000 jobs. Now, granted, many of those 4,000 jobs are not critical jobs. You know, the guy in charge of the TVA in Arkansas, Eastern Arkansas. That's not going to impact much on our foreign and defense and national security policy, but definitely the Secretary of State and secondary, tertiary levels, Pentagon, National Security Council, CIA, they are very key, and I would hope that he keeps the neocons far away from those positions.
Well, boy, I mean, those are very valid comments. I see his connection to Netanyahu is a strong connection, is it not?
It is, at least verbally. He said he's with Israel, but he's also said that he'd be an honest broker in Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. I hope that's where he goes and not the backslapping. I'm with people like Netanyahu and people that support Netanyahu. Obviously, anyone who runs for president of the United States has to publicly kowtow to the Israeli interests in this country. And maybe, I'm hoping that's all he was doing, but that he doesn't, move the U.S. Embassy, for example, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We'd be the only country which has done that. And I'm a little concerned about the influence of his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who is him and his father, who's an ex-federal con, by the way, are very, very pro-Israel. And I've written a recent article pointing out that Charles Kushner, the father of Jared Kushner, who served time in jail, was prosecuted by then federal prosecutor Chris Christie, and he got his revenge by getting rid of Christie on the transition team. That Charles Kushner has long been associated with blackmail operations, including some involving Mossad. The key one being the outing through a Mossad operative of former Democratic governor of New Jersey, Jim McGreevey, who got involved through Charles Kushner with a Mossad honeypot, a gay honeypot, and was forced to resign his office when that honeypot decided to sue Governor McGreevey for sexual harassment. So that kind of connection, I would keep. I know he can't distance himself from his own son-in-law, but I certainly hope the son-in-law doesn't have any sort of policy making job within the White House.
Well, one of the things that I discovered through researching the son-in-law, that would be Jared Kushner, his brother Josh has connections back to Peter Thiel for investments through Thrive, these Thrive investment vehicles. And then also Josh is a former employee of Goldman Sachs when he first came out of college.
Yeah, we also know that.
I mean, it's Goldman Sachs over and over.
Yeah,
much.
We know that Trump criticized during the campaign Hillary Clinton's ties to Goldman Sachs. We also know that one of the guys on the short list for Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, is also a former executive with Goldman Sachs, as is Steve Bannon, who's going to be in charge of, basically, he's going to be Trump's version of Karl Rove, who used to also work for Goldman Sachs. So, yeah, there's some troubling ties. I would like to think that if you're from New York in the financial industry, it probably is hard not to have been associated with Goldman Sachs. I know I used to be an engineer working for RCA. RCA was one of the top high-tech companies in the United States at one point in time, and I've run into so many people in my course throughout my life who also at one point in time worked for RCA. It was hard to avoid if you were in the engineering business, but I hope that's all it is with these Goldman Sachs people, that it's either they were Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan. You can't avoid those two. I hope they don't carry the water, though, for the Goldman Sachs and the J.P. Morgans of the world, that they just happen to have them as a past employer.
Well, Steve Mnuchin's father was a general partner for 30 years at Goldman Sachs. Steve Mnuchin stayed with them for 17 years after college, and I think he's a Skull and Bones member, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So, he's in there at the top. Yeah,
these are the kind of entanglements that I think we have to be careful of. But any of Trump's appointments, for example, Treasury Secretary that goes up for Senate confirmation, you would like to think that these questions would be asked about links to Goldman Sachs. Let's see then if Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren or Charles Grassley, who's just been reelected, the Republican from Iowa, have enough guts and fortitude to ask these nominees about their links with Goldman Sachs. That unfortunately, in most confirmation hearings, it's always a love fest. They talk about, how's your kids, how's your wife, and then they vote to confirm these people unanimously. I hope that's not the case with some of the people in the Senate.
But what also is interesting is Peter Thiel, I guess it would be Thiel auf Deutsch, also founded Palantir. And Palantir is the word that used in the Lord of the Rings to describe seeing stones, where you could look into them and see the future or the past. And then it was initially funded by the CIA. So he's there mining these big databases.
Yeah.
And Thiel's trying to get in there at the top with Trump.
And
it's worrying some of these individuals.
And Palantir is a deep data mining company that contracted to the NSA and the CIA, I think that's very problematic. If Thiel were to get some sort of job in the Defense Department or NSA or CIA, he has a major conflict of interest right off the bat.
Right. You have a background somewhat to the NSA, is that correct?
I worked for NSA back in the 80s, mid-80s. I was a lieutenant in the Navy. I was assigned to the NSA. My job was basically to help implement President Reagan's National Security Directive number 2, which was signed by then National Security Advisor John Poindexter, and it was all about trying to find out from the then online databases, which you dialed into in those days, if they had any problematic customers. It was the first time I experienced people in the industry.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. You learned so much at an early age. How old were you? You were real young then?
I was in my early 30s at the time.
And you really grabbed hold of a wide view from that, didn't you?
I found out.
Very broad view.
What I found out was when you call a company, even if it's somebody like Lockheed, which had Dialog at the time, or LexisNexis, and you say I'm from the NSA, and we need to determine if, for example, the Soviets or the Chinese are your customers. They say, yeah, they are, and you guys are too. Click, they'd hang up on me. It's none of your business trying to find out who our clients are and what kind of deals we have with them. So later on, I was on the other side criticizing some of NSA's programs, like the Clipper chip to escrow encryption keys, for example. So
one of your books has a list of those programs, does it not?
Absolutely,
yes,
yeah.
And you're really insightful in that. That book explains a lot of the programs, and tells us what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I have to. I think it's good to say this. Just a couple blocks from where President Kennedy was killed, that he, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, said he was going to tear the CIA up into 1,000 pieces and cast it into the wind. I think that's the only way you can deal with these omniscient intelligence agencies. They've gotten too strong. You cannot reform something that's already bad. You got to do like other dictatorships after they were overthrown. They got rid of the KGB in Russia. They got rid of the Securitate in Romania. They got rid of the Gestapo in Germany for the most part. Then we went in there and recreated it with the help of Gestapo agents as the German intelligence service.
Oh,
but
man.
The only way to deal with these agencies that have committed all these abuses, including involvement in the killing of President Kennedy, is to get rid of them. The venerable New York Senator Pat Moynihan suggested scaling them back and putting them back under the State Department. That doesn't really solve the problem because you still have the core bad seed. It would just germinate inside the State Department instead at Langley, Virginia. The only way you deal with them is to get rid of them. I know President Truman regretted even starting the agency, and when he did it in '47, later he said it got out of hand. What I created got out of hand. He expressed remorse. He also talked about reform. No, I would disagree. The only way Kennedy had the right idea: get rid of them. And, of course, he paid the ultimate price for that. But I would hope that some president, maybe Trump, might finally start to curtail the abuses of especially the CIA. But now we know from Snowden and others that the NSA is also totally out of control.
Well, Wayne Madsen, thank you very much for this interview, and your wide experience and has really added a great deal to understanding the true reality. And it's difficult to get to the true reality or the truth sometimes, is it not?
Oh, it is. It is. And all I try to do with my website, WayneMadsenReport.com, is to try to keep the spirit of muckraking journalism alive in the United States. It goes back to Drew Pearson and Jack Anderson with the Washington Merry-Go-Round. It goes back to H.L. Mencken and Ida Tarbell and Lincoln Steffens at the time of the robber barons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans and whatnot. That spirit has to be kept alive, and that's all I'm trying to do is keep alive that spirit of peculiarly American journalism, muckraking, that I think is lost largely when you look at the vast wasteland of what's offered up as news on cable TV, for example.
Well, thank you very much, Wayne Madsen, for being with us at this conference. We certainly appreciate your time and your dedication to truth.
Hi. Well, good. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.